Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our webinar on our environmental legacy, your role in the SNAP provincial election. Thank you, everyone who's joined so far. People are still rolling in, but as we have a tight agenda today, we'll just get started. So my name is Lesley Rudy. I'm the Nature Network organizer at Ontario Nature, and my role is as a liaison with our 150 Nature Network groups, and we'll hear a little bit more about Ontario Nature from Tony later. With me from Ontario Nature is John Hassel, who's our Director of Communication, and he's going to be helping us run this webinar. And it's co-hosted with Climate Legacy, and we'll hear from Betty at Climate Legacy in a moment. I just want to go through a couple of housekeeping items before we get started. So this is being hosted in a webinar format. So if you're not familiar, that means only the hosts and panelists are visible and can speak, and everybody else won't be shown. Your faces or names won't be shown. And so you won't be able to speak out to ask questions. You'll need to put them in the Q&A. So there's a chat and a Q&A at the bottom of your screen. The chat you can use to, as I see many people are doing, which is great, to introduce yourself and have a sort of informal conversations. Or if you have some technical questions, you can put them there as well. Please use the Q&A function for questions for our panelists, which we will get to at the end of the webinar. So you can put them in there, and we will, John will be moderating those questions at the end. And if they are for a particular speaker, then make sure you highlight that in your question in the Q&A. Just a reminder that we are a charity, and as such, we need to remain nonpartisan. So we're going to do our best to focus on issues and policies and not on parties or platforms. So the agenda is going to be, I'm going to give a land acknowledgement, and we are going to do a short poll just to hear a little bit from you folks. Then we're going to hear from Betty about climate legacy. And then we will hear from Tony at Ontario Nature and his presentation. And next will be Franz Hartman from the Alliance for Liveable Ontario and his presentation. Next will be Gerry Jenkison from the Prince Edward County Field Naturalists. He'll speak to local efforts and her presentation, and then we will take questions at the end, and John will moderate those, as I said, and present your questions from the Q&A to the speakers. So with that, I'd like to give my land acknowledgement. I'm located in Kingston, Ontario, and thank you to everyone who's joining from across the province. And it's great to see those of you acknowledging the Indigenous heritage where you are from. So here in what is now called the city of Kingston is situated in the traditional homeland of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and the Huron-Wendat. This region has been home to Indigenous people since time immemorial. Several different First Nations and people have existed or coexisted in this area over time, and today it is home to a growing urban population of over 7,000 residents who identify as First Nations, Inuit, or Métis. This area is part of the Crawford Purchase of 1783. There was never a formal treaty signed for this area, and parts of the Crawford Purchase are considered illegitimate by the Algonquin people who were not party to the purchase. I acknowledge this territory's significance for the Indigenous people who lived and continue to live upon it, and whose practices and spiritualities are tied to the land. I thank these nations for their care and stewardship over this land, and I am very grateful to be able to live, work, and play here. Thank you. So with that, I think, John, we're ready for the poll and to hear a little bit. I forgot to say at the beginning, this webinar is being recorded. You should have got a little notice when you joined the webinar that said that, and we will share the recording with everybody afterwards. So you'll get an email in a couple of days after this webinar that will have a link to the recording, and you're welcome to view it again and share it with other people. And with that, I would like to hand it over to Betty Plewes from Climate Legacy, and she'll just tell us a little bit about that organization.
Yes, hello everyone and welcome. I'm very pleased to be here tonight. Climate Legacy, I'm a member of the steering committee, is a project to engage more seniors in climate action through the use of their time and their money and their voice. And we support our members through educational resources, a regular newsletter, webinars, and we also connect seniors to activities, opportunities to take action. You'll see in the chat that our website is there. So if you'd like to, feel free to click and subscribe so that we can keep in touch. And so I'd like to shout out to all the seniors who are currently active on environmental and climate issues who've joined us tonight. It's wonderful to see so many people here, and I assume that many of you are seniors. Thanks also very much to Lesley and Ontario Nature for inviting us to co-host this election webinar. Back to you, Lesley.
Thanks, Betty. And so we'll get now to our first speaker, who is Tony Morris from Ontario Nature. Tony is our Conservation Policy and Campaigns Director. And I will let you take it away, Tony.
Thanks, Lesley. So as Lesley mentioned, my name is Tony Morris, and I am the Conservation Policy and Campaigns Director at Ontario Nature. For those not familiar with Ontario Nature, we are a registered charity established in 1931 with a mission to protect wild species and wild spaces. We represent more than 30,000 members and supporters across the province, and as Lesley mentioned, have 150 member groups known as our Nature Network. Essentially, we're there where nature needs us most. So this election is particularly important because the environment is not likely to be a prominent issue without a strong push from concerned citizens and community groups. Affordability and the threats from the United States are likely to dominate headlines, as we've been seeing since the election was called. Yet we know that there's been a trend over the last several years of weakened environmental protections in Ontario, all while the biodiversity and climate crises get worse. These crises are interrelated, and failing to address these issues will only make other issues like affordability and livability worse. In other words, Ontario faces many challenges, and we can't continue to ignore the environmental crises or make them worse to solve other issues like the housing crisis. So with that, Ontario Nature has several election priorities informing our strategy this election. These priorities have been sent to the main party leaders, asking them to commit to nature. These priorities have also been sent to our Nature Network and members, urging them to vote for nature. Primarily, we are urging each of the major parties to commit to a strategy to halt and reverse biodiversity decline by protecting 30% of lands and waters by 2030, restoring the Endangered Species Act, enabling Indigenous protected conserved areas, increasing climate adaptation funding, and permanently protecting large intact forest landscapes from industrial activities like mining and forestry. Secondly, we are asking that Ontario's provincial planning framework be restored to protect our ecosystems and biodiversity. Over the last several years, this system has been repeatedly changed in the name of solving the housing crisis while reducing protections for ecosystems. Specifically, we are asking that the powers of the conservation authorities be restored, changes to the Planning Act that weaken protections for our environment be reversed, and projects like the Highway 413 and Bradford Bypass be cancelled, and protections for wetlands be restored, as well as strengthening and protecting the Greenbelt. What Ontario Nature is doing so far, we've published an election website, which has all of various resources that I'll go through. We're also working with several of our coalition partners, some of them Alliance for a Liveable Ontario. Franz will be speaking of that shortly, but also groups like Green Prosperity, which is a collective of environmental not-for-profits. We've on our website, election tool, you'll find an election toolkit, which basically gives you information on key messaging, top policy asks and some of the other resources we'll go through. We also sent a joint letter to all the party leaders asking them to focus on our top policy asks. We've published opinions in major newspapers, and we've published a blog on the election. We're also hosting this webinar. Our toolkit has some key messaging that you can use for your own purpose, some of which is shown here. That really, a vote for nature is a vote for access to nearby natural areas. A vote for nature is a vote for healthy natural areas for wild species to thrive. A vote for nature is also a vote for the security and well-being of our children and grandchildren. Our toolkit also has a series of questions that can be used in debates to local candidates or emails to your local candidates, such as, if elected, what will you do to ensure Ontario protects 30% of its lands and waters by 2030? How will you ensure development addresses our housing crisis without destroying natural areas and precious farmland? As part of our strategy, we're also debunking some of the myths that are perpetuated at the current moment. So, for example, housing and nature are not mutually exclusive. Good housing policy is also good for the environment, which Franz will touch on more shortly. We're also pointing out that the provincial government does not have control over international trade, but it does have control over environmental policy related to species at risk and wetland protection. And that fundamentally, environment, human health, prosperity, and security are all intrinsically linked. And perhaps the most prevalent at the moment, that building highways does not really reduce congestion, but it does remove vital farmland and natural areas. So as groups and individuals, what can you do? You can get informed about party platforms or party priorities and election issues. You can email, call, or otherwise contact your local candidates. You can write op-eds and letters to the editor at your local papers, post on social media, go to all candidate debates and ask them questions, and really fundamentally talk to your friends, family, and extended network, urging them to vote for nature. So as I mentioned, on Ontario Nature's website, you can find our provincial election toolkit, as well as our election page, and on our blog, you can find more information. We also have advocacy toolkits on our website for how to influence decision makers, letter writing, media outreach. Thank you. And with that, I will turn it back over to Lesley.
Our next speaker will be Franz Hartman, who is the coordinator of the Alliance for a Liveable Ontario. And you can see from his bio that he has a long history of engagement on environmental climate policy, advocacy, and organizing. We're very fortunate to have him with us tonight and to hear what he has to say about the upcoming elections. So over to you, Franz.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. I'm going to share my screen now, so just bear with me while I get that happening. Okay, and I'm assuming everybody can see that now. Yeah. Okay. Again, thank you so much for the invitation. My name is Franz Hartman. I am the coordinator of the Alliance for a Liveable Ontario. And just to be clear, it's Liveable with an E, which is the Canadian spelling, not the American spelling. The Alliance for a Liveable Ontario, what are we? We are an alliance of people and groups representing hundreds of thousands of Ontarians from many different sectors. We represent farmers, environmentalists, urban planners, housing affordability advocates, tenant groups, neighborhood associations, labor, healthcare, academia, businesses, much more. We've come together because we want to make sure that we're building a livable Ontario, that we are not destroying ecosystems, that we're not destroying precious farmland on the false promise of building more housing. So why focus on housing? there's a very simple reason, and I've been an environmentalist for all of my adult life, and I think housing is probably the most important environmental issue right now. Why? Because the housing we build, how we build it, where we build it, and how we move around from our house, from our homes to where we live, work, and play has a huge impact on carbon emissions, on ecosystem health, and on climate resilience. If we get housing right, we can actually reduce carbon emissions and improve ecological resilience. If we get housing wrong, we lock ourselves into high carbon emissions for at least the next generation, and we're going to severely undermine ecological resilience, at least for human beings. So I think this is not news to anyone, but we have a housing crisis. In Ontario, too many Ontarians are spending more than 30% of their gross household income on rent or mortgage costs. Too many Ontarians can't find the right-sized homes in the neighborhoods they want to live in. And too many Ontarians believe we need to sacrifice environmental protection for new housing. Tony touched on this a few moments ago, but that has been the frame that the Premier and many developers have been using for at least the last 3 years. If we want to solve the housing crisis, we have to give up things that like environmental protection and the Greenbelt. And this justification has been used for a lot of attacks. Tony's already touched on these, the attack on the Greenbelt, on conservation authorities, on endangered species legislation. It's been used to attack green building standards because they're seen as too expensive and bringing up the price of housing. And this justification has been used for forcing public subsidies for new fossil fuel connections to new homes, which ironically actually raises the price of new homes. So why do these problems exist? Put simply, there's 3 reasons. The first is we're building the wrong mix of housing types. We're building too many suburban, single-family, sprawl homes, or we're building matchbox-sized small condo units in high-rise towers in what are sometimes described as forests of towers in hyperdensity. And we're not building enough what's called gentle density or missing middle housing. The picture at the top on the right, that's my laneway house in my backyard here in downtown Toronto. We got rid of that laneway house and built, we got rid of, a garage and built that laneway house so my wife and I can move in there and age in place there. We need more examples of gentle density like that. We need more examples of mid-rise buildings like we have in the bottom right in the picture there. More examples of multi-residential housing like we see in the below the laneway house. We need a lot more of this type of housing called gentle density, called missing middle. The second reason is we're building in the wrong places. Precious farmland and natural areas are being destroyed, and this is reducing food security, which is becoming increasingly important, especially in a Trump tariff world, and it's making us more vulnerable to the climate crisis, and it also increased costs because suburban sprawl costs a huge amount of money because of the new infrastructure required, the new roads, bridges, the sewer systems, the water systems, the new libraries, all that new infrastructure costs a lot of money. And the third reason that we're having a housing crisis is that we're no longer building non-market affordable housing. This is housing that is run by not-for-profits, by housing co-ops, by sometimes government agencies, a whole bunch of others, what are called nonprofit housing providers. From the 1960s to the early 90s, governments financed the construction of tens of thousands of non-market homes every year. And then they stopped doing that for a whole bunch of reasons. Because this sort of housing is not being built, more and more and more people are having to live in crowded housing, or they're having to not live anywhere except on the streets and on park benches and on tents. In late fall of last year, we released a report card that assessed how the province was doing on the housing file. Like Ontario Nature, we are a charitable, we're part of a charitable organization called the Small Change Fund. We are nonpartisan. But this is what the province did. They should have been building affordable homes in towns and cities, not on farmland, and they didn't do that. They prioritized expensive single-family homes. They should have built a wide variety of housing types and not more single-family homes. Instead, they eliminated the requirements to build missing middle, mid-rise, and other diverse housing types. They should have invested heavily in non-market affordable housing. Instead, they failed to invest in helping housing providers build more needed non-market housing. In other words, the province is pushing the wrong type of housing in the wrong places at the wrong prices. You can read the full report at the liveableontario.ca website. So what we're in a situation now where provincial land use planning policies are once again supporting suburban sprawl. It's essentially a 1950s economic model for building homes that builds the wrong type of housing in the wrong places at the wrong prices. And we all know that Trump's threatened new tariffs became real this afternoon, will make life more expensive and increase food insecurity. So does building in the wrong type of housing in the wrong places at the wrong prices. So if we want to minimize the impact of Trump's tariff threats and protect farmland and natural areas and the Greenbelt, from costly and destructive suburban sprawl, we need to make sure the public is demanding the right actions from government. And if we want the next generation of Ontarians to have housing that is affordable and part of livable communities, we have to make sure that the public is demanding the right actions from government. So we found 5 actions that will do this. And it's part of a campaign that's called Taking Action Together, 5 Ways to Make Homes More Affordable in Ontario. And I want to show you a short video, which I think sums everything up.
You probably know someone who can't find a home they can afford. It wasn't always like this. And while we can argue and debate about what happened and didn't happen, talking won't make affordable homes happen. So a bunch of us got together and found 5 ways that will. Number 1, gutting farmland and nature to build McMansions in places where you need 2 cars and have to install expensive infrastructure is not the answer. We need to build in the right places, affordable, livable neighborhoods where people already live and want to live. And we already have enough ready-to-build room inside our towns and cities to do it. Number 2, while everyone needs something different and affordable, too many of these are being built. We need to build a wide variety of housing types: low-rise, mid-rise, not-for-profit, multi-unit, multi-family, multi-bedroom. A multiplex of more affordable, appropriate options for every stage of life. Number 3, the way most homes are built and the laws around building them are not built for affordability or speed. We need to build smarter and faster, like more wood frame and prefab panel homes, and updating old rules, like high-rises needing parking for everyone. We can cut costs and time with faster and smarter rules, approvals, and building methods. Number 4, for decades, our governments built and operated affordable, non-market housing. Then, affordable housing stopped going up, but rents didn't. We need to invest heavily in non-market affordable housing. And we is our governments. Builders will build it, co-ops and other groups will run it, but our governments must invest in it because almost no one else is. Number 5, we can't be hurrying like mad to approve and demolish and build without stopping to think about neighborhoods. We need to make housing not just affordable, but part of livable communities. Affordable means building in the right places, building smarter and faster, and building more choices and more non-market homes. While livable means building neighborhoods, close, convenient communities that bring everything we need together, including each other. These are our 5 ways to affordability. But there's actually one more. We need everyone, governments, the private sector, and nonprofit housing providers to work together to fix this. And we need you to tell your MPP that they've got 5 things to do to help everyone have an affordable, livable home now. Learn all that you can do at fiveways.home.ca.
So in communications, rule number 1 is always repeat your message. So the 5 actions: build in the right places, build a wide variety of housing types, build smarter and faster, invest heavily in non-market affordable housing, and make housing affordable and part of livable communities. We came up with a campaign for 3 reasons. One was to provide hope for Ontarians that there are doable solutions to the housing crisis. The second was to get our message out to as many people as possible. We wanted to make it easy to understand and easy to share. And thirdly, we wanted to provide an alternative to the destructive actions that are being pushed by the province. We have some very significant report endorsers. Some of the names here, you can see all of this on our website. In fact, we've created a website called Taking Action Together. Just going to tour you on it very quickly. You come to the website and you can jump to each of the 5 action areas. You can download the report. There's special videos for each one of those. Lots of information there. There's a take action section as well. Now, we all know that we're going to be voting on February 27th. And our goals are to make sure that voters know about the province's ruinous sprawl plans that harm the greenbelt, farmland, and natural areas while only making the housing crisis worse. And we're hoping to spread hope about how to make homes affordable and part of livable communities by promoting the 5 Ways Home actions. The power we have, and I think you've heard this before, but I think it's really important to underscore that this is real power. Our opinions are shaped by those we trust, our friends and our networks, and each of us have friends and networks that trust us. And organizations like Ontarian Nature have members that trust them. Collectively, this gives us power to influence many tens of thousands of people. But to use this power, we need tools that help us effectively connect with our friends and networks. So we've created that at the Liveable Ontario website. We have a resource, an election readiness toolkit. Just going to walk you through some of it here. We have a take action section. For example, you can send a letter to all political party leaders asking them to endorse our 5 Ways Home actions. We also have, because people are going to be coming and knocking on your door, we have a 5 Ways Home poster that you can download and print. Essentially, I vote 5 Ways Home, want my vote, promise to make homes affordable and part of livable communities. And we also have all of the information that I've talked about just now. We have the provincial housing report card, a special report to political party leaders in Ontario, asking them to endorse our report, the 5 Ways Home website, the video I just showed you, and social media tools, etc. And if you're interested in what we're doing, by all means, consider inviting us to come and talk to your group. I try to come where I can in person, also willing to do it virtually. But the bottom line is talking about housing and talking about these solutions is also talking about the environment. So what can you use? What can you do? You can use our tools to talk to your friends and networks and organizational members about making homes affordable and part of livable communities. Use your email and social media channels to promote our actions and resources. Invite us to speak or become a member and make a donation. Together, we can reach hundreds of thousands of Ontarians and help them vote for a livable Ontario. And that's what I'm hoping is the takeaway message to all of you, that you can use housing as a way of talking about environmental issues and getting people involved. And if they talk about housing and if they talk about how doing housing in the right way, we preserve a lot of ecological spaces, we reduce carbon emissions, and we stop Ontario from going down a very dangerous road. One more thing I do want to talk to you about, which is independent of the Alliance for Livable Ontario, but it has been created by a number of people who are involved with the Alliance, including myself. And it's something called the Trillium Declaration. This was established in the last couple of weeks, actually. The urgency, Canada, including Ontario, is facing unprecedented threats to its economic and political sovereignty from the US. We must adapt and prepare provincial policies to protect and strengthen what makes us Canadian. So we have come up with a declaration, a list of action items, a to-do list, if you will, for the next provincial parliament after the election to say this is what we need to do here in Ontario to get our house in order so that we can weather the Trump tariffs. Very simply, make our public healthcare system effective and resilient, ensure food security by stopping development on farmland, ensure there is proper income support for those in need, build the housing we need and can afford. This is an encapsulation of our 5 Ways Home messaging. Create a climate resilient future. I'm just going to read this because I think it's so important. We can't wish away the impacts of the climate and biodiversity crises. Doing so will only create greater economic harm. We must protect our precious natural areas and freshwater resources, especially in the Greenbelt, which are invaluable for Ontario's future sustainability. Properly fund our education system and reduce costs to municipal taxpayers. If we're building sprawl, taxes are going to go up. And direct public funds to actions that help the most number of people. This is not the time, if there ever was a time, to invest public dollars in private spas or new mega highways or tunnels under the highways. We cannot afford this. So if you like this, just Google Trillium Declaration .ca and you will see this and join the over, I think, 280 people who have already signed this. So with that, this is well, if you want to just snap a picture of this, you can use a QR code to get to the website. With that, I thank you very much, and I hand it back to Lesley.
Thank you very much, Franz. Lots of good information there. And in case you folks haven't seen it, both Ontario Nature and the Alliance for Livable Ontario's resources have been posted in the chat. And again, we will be sharing this webinar, so you'll be able to see those websites and everything again. So next, we wanted to invite a local group, a smaller group, to talk about the grassroots actions that they take on a community level. So we have with us today Gerry Jenkison, who is the president of the Prince Edward County Field Naturalists. Thank you very much, Gerry, for coming today, and we look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you very much for the invitation, Lesley. I greatly appreciate it. If you would share my slides now, please.
Coming up. Sorry, just having a slight technical difficulty there. It's coming.
Well, while you're working the tech difficulties out, oh, here we go. Very good.
Nope, that's not the right one.
Okay. So let me tell people who don't live in southeastern Ontario where our area is. Prince Edward County, we refer to it as the county for short. We're an island south of Trenton and Belleville. We are very rural here. We have 1,000 square kilometers with a population of 25,000 people. Because we're an island, we have a lot of really beautiful coastline. And we're also very rich in biodiversity, which we try to protect as best we can. Franz was talking about disappearing natural wild areas. We have that challenge here too. We seem to be in front of council almost every week advocating against inappropriate development that's in the wrong place, i.e. a place that's supposed to be protected by our official plan. Anyway, again, thank you for this opportunity to tell you about our projects in this small club that we all belong to. Could you go to the next slide, please, Lesley? Great, thank you. So we are a group of about 100 people, which is probably very small to most of you out there, or maybe not. We're an incorporated not-for-profit, and we're an Ontario Nature affiliate. Our annual budget of around $8,000 all comes from membership fees and our very generous members. If you want to learn more about what we do, and we do a lot, please check out our website, pecfieldnaturalists.org. So Lesley asked me to talk about a couple of advocacy projects that we've done here. I chose to talk about our municipal all candidates meetings that we held in 2022, where we held 4 town hall meetings across the county and focused questions about the natural environment and heritage, and a little bit about climate change. And then I want to present a couple of slides about our opposition to the egregious Ford government's More Homes Built Faster Act, which, as we've heard so well already, was really about taking environmental protection away. In our case, we're particularly concerned about wetlands, but also farmland. Next slide, please, Lesley. So I'll start off with a few slides about our all candidates meetings. We wanted to find out what candidates would bring to the table if they were elected about the natural heritage, about strategies to protect it, and about mitigating adaptation to the climate crisis locally. I should tell you a little bit more background about this. Our latest official plan actually hadn't been, our official plan, OP, hadn't been updated for a very long time. And we, PECFIN, together with another organization that protects the environment and a couple of councillors, worked hard to define those natural core areas to get the best protections that we could for them, and also to define what major development really is, because we should not be doing major development on our natural core areas, of course. So we worked hard on that, and defending our natural heritage was foremost in finding out what people would bring to the table about how to protect, whether they would commit to protecting these natural areas. So for planning, and I should point out that our previous president, Amy Bodman, who some of you will know, did an amazing job in pushing this project forward. So we started off with talking to municipal staff. We got buy-in from our local municipal clerk, Catalina Bloomberg, who was very, very helpful. And we chose 4 town halls to hold meetings in. Hillier, which is a tiny place, Bloomfield, which is a village, Milford's the village, and Picton is a town of about 4,000 people. That is our major town around here. We thought it was important, and we always think it's important, to involve other community groups as partners. And we selected meeting moderators from those local communities. To the right, you see an ad that we had commissioned for 3 of our 4 meetings. The first one had already taken place, with four logos. Our old one on the left-hand side, the Bloomfield Business Association, then Tree the County, which is a group involved in growing and protecting the tree canopy in the county, and finally the South Shore Joint Initiative, who've done an amazing job about increasing protections on our outstanding South Shore. Next one, please. So we honed the questions. We came up with questions as a board, and then we honed them down to these essential areas, which I probably already mentioned. Natural core areas, areas of scientific interest, environment versus economy, well, development. How would anyone coming to the table protect the environment when thinking about economic development? And also their response to local response to the climate emergency. And again, we build community by working with rec groups, local business associations, youth, which we are actually very proud of what we managed to accomplish in Picton, and South Shore Joint Initiative. And I should say, oh, hi, John Foster, just see a chat from you. I should say that we are an aging population here. I forget what the median age is, but we're definitely a growing population, growing gray populations. So it was important for us to try and engage youth. On the right-hand side there, you see one of the town halls that we held one of the meetings in. Next slide, please, Lesley. So essential to get the word out. So that we could have really wide audiences. We actually had no problem getting the candidates to come to our meetings, and I think we've got a very good reputation in the community, and people wanted this opportunity to air their platforms and to answer our questions. So we have a large mailing list, and so did our community partners. They were all used. We wrote press releases. They were picked up by the local media. We paid for ads, which you saw earlier. We made use of every possible channel of free announcements, and we used social media. I should tell you about our local media because it's a very special thing. I think we're very fortunate to have them. We have two lively local newspapers. One is in the village of Wellington and the other is in the town of Picton. They are locally owned. They have no connection to large media, to any other media and conglomerate. So we feel very lucky to have this amount of focus on local issues. And they also publish good news from time to time, which if you've been reading the news lately is rare. So kudos to our local media. Thank you for always supporting us so well. There is also County Live, which is an online media source. So running the meetings, this was fairly standard. We introduced the speakers, the candidates. They were allowed 3 minutes each to introduce themselves. We read our prepared questions from Peckham. Our moderator timed the answers. We took questions from the floor, again with timed answers. And if there was time left, the candidates got to give some summary remarks. And on the right, you see our lovely little Bloomfield Town Hall, which is where Peckham holds all our members' meetings. Next slide, please, Lesley. Great. So who did we engage in all this? In Hillier, the smallest place, their recreation committee, we still managed to pretty well fill the room. In Bloomfield, local business association. In Milford, which is in South Marysburg, the South Shore Joint Initiative, very much a strong partner of ours, ran the meeting. And I think we did ancillary things like read the questions. Picton, because it has a larger population, it also has a larger town hall. We hosted it jointly with the Tree Canopy group I mentioned earlier, Tree the County, and our priority was to involve youth, really. Moderators, we had one from the PEC Learning Center. This is an organization that teaches life and job skills to young people in the county between the ages of 18 and 30. And we had a moderator from the high school, which was fantastic. we had the remarkable thing about this was the success we had in getting the youth out, and that is largely due to the PEC Learning Centre and also to publicity in the high school. We had youth lining up to ask questions at the mic, honestly, round the back of the room. It was really exciting and gratifying. So I think that is the end. I hope that's the end of my slides about the town hall meetings. But I should say what was successful. The turnout was tremendous, and the participation by the candidates. Every room was filled with people to the rafters. They were very, very impressed with the turnout. One thing that I should mention, we chose town halls rather than larger community centres. And you probably know all this from your personal lives. Exciting events occur in smaller locations where people are, almost cheek by jowl, but certainly where you can feel that energy of a lot of people. In a much larger location, people get lost and you miss that buzz. What would we have done better? We decided not to give, in 3 locations, we decided not to provide the questions in advance. And I think we would rethink that next time, at least I would recommend we would, because it wasn't at all a level playing field in that the candidates who are already councillors had a leg up, and the candidates did not really have a source where they could do their research. However, having said that, one of the councillors did an amazing job of research in Bloomfield. Very impressive, but fortunately she wasn't elected because name recognition, as we know, unfortunately, is just so important. So next slide, please, Lesley. Right, so the last 2 slides were in opposition to More Homes Built Faster Act, which, as someone had said recently, more recently in the last, one of the last 2 presentations, was really a smokescreen for loosening or eliminating environmental protections. The first one, we organised a rally outside our local MPP's constituency office, and that's right and at the north end of the county. In fact, it's really in Rossmore. We had a big crowd again, and we did a lot of work with the Quinty Field Naturalists on this. So I really do want to highlight our little local field naturalist partners, who are actually larger than us, who are terrific to work with. We publicized the event with posters and press releases and maybe radio interviews. I don't actually remember. There were many concerned groups that took part in this, and I did actually have their names with me, but I probably don't have time to read them all, but they were there and they were really important. Group leaders made speeches, as did councillors, and the main force in my mind, in my memory behind this, was part of the QFN board, Laurie Borthwick. After all the speeches had finished, Laurie invited people from the crowd to come to the mic and describe the importance of wetlands to themselves. What did a wetland that was close to them mean to them? What did the biodiversity in wetlands mean to them? And this was such a good idea. I mean, a brilliant idea, really. And it was moving and heartfelt. And we got lots of press coverage. On to the next slide, please, because this was the next event. So next slide, please, Lesley. Right. So I mentioned Laurie Borthwick in the previous slide. So this terrific theme, Requiem for Wetlands of the Quinty Watershed, was Laurie's brainwave. And QFN was majorly organized an organizer in this with Peckman and the other groups. And so Laurie brought some props. If you look on the photograph at the right, you will see her handmade cardboard coffin sprayed black. And around it are displayed some of the, she made cards of all the names and locations of the 101 threatened wetlands in the Quinte watershed, which was such a good idea. And people at the protest placed them in the cardboard coffin. We made a procession to across the Moira River in Belleville, stood on the footbridge. A local filmmaker took drone footage and sent the video he made to the local TV station. And lastly, Laurie delivered the coffin to the MPP's constituency for a photo op, and then she removed it for safety reasons. So it was a very dramatic event. There were a lot of people there, and everyone enjoyed it. I know at the time we were super angry, and we're still super angry, but there's nothing like building community and making connections to launch a good protest. And I think that's it from me. I would encourage all of you, when the next opportunity arises, to try these all candidates meetings for yourselves, especially in smaller areas. It was definitely worthwhile. So thank you. Thank you everyone for listening to my presentation. And again, thank you, Lesley and Betty, for inviting me.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Gerry. I hope that gives everyone a little bit of inspiration. It did to me about what, you know, a small group of concerned citizens can do in your local area. So there's some great ideas and actions there, and we hope that some of you will be encouraged to do similar types of things. That actually concludes all of our presentations. And so we're going to get to the question and answer period now. So I hope you guys are furiously typing your questions into the Q&A, and I will turn it over to John to moderate that question and answer.
Great, thanks, Lesley. So we've had a few questions come in. One was a question about how high our ecological footprints are, and a note that if everybody lived like us, the planet wouldn't last very long. So the question is, why are we focusing on the housing crisis and not about creating a sustainable economy? So maybe I think this is probably directed more to Franz and Tony, so maybe we can go in that order. You could field that.
Sure. So the economy is a very, very big thing. And the ecological so that's number one, the housing crisis. When the housing crisis is something people understand, and they have a visceral anxiety around it right now. So talking about housing is a way of actually getting people's attention in a way that if you just talked about economy or even ecological footprint, most people wouldn't really know what you're talking about. Just one note of caution when using the ecological footprint idea. Ecological footprint varies dramatically depending on how much money you earn and spend in a year. And I'm going to get these numbers wrong, but I know that there was a study that was done recently by a not-for-profit organization, and said essentially the ecological footprint of, I think, the 50 richest people is something like the equivalent to 30 or 40% of the planet. So there are a lot of disparities there, but all of this is to say, if you talk about housing, people will nod and go, yep, what can we do? If you talk about the economy, a lot of times people just say, well, you're talking about the weather, we have no control over it. So we decided to focus on housing because if we get it right, we can at least reduce our carbon footprint, probably even also our ecological footprint.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Franz that, complex issues that basically are kind of interrelated crises. It's very complicated to communicate that in a coherent, simple way, particularly when we live in an age where things are slogans and sound bites and hashtags, and you only get 30 seconds to really convey a point. I mean, from Ontario Nature's perspective, the focus of voting for nature is to recognize that we as a society are having too great of an impact on the natural world in nearly everything that we do as a society. So some of the things that you're talking about in terms of why are we now talking about transitioning to a sustainable economy, I would say we're trying to simplify it by basically making the point that we know people love nature. It's one of the things that's built into the mythos of Canadians, right? That we have a lot of wild spaces and a lot of wilderness. But we're seeing in Ontario, basically that natural legacy being degraded and threatened because we are choosing a form of development and an economic system that is undermining the health and integrity of the natural world.
Thanks, both great answers, and I think paint the full picture there. We've got a question about public transportation. So, somebody said they're not born in Ontario, but they're shocked by the number of cars, and now here we are talking about building more highways. So maybe I'll just kind of open this up to the floor if anybody has thoughts on this.
Well, I'll take a go at it. People who have few choices of where to live, and if the only thing that's on offer is a house, a single-family house far away, and they work far away from where they're living, and there isn't decent transit, they have to drive. And I think that's why I said at the outset of my presentation, why if we get the housing right and the transportation systems right, we reduce our carbon footprint. And I think that's why it's important to talk about these things and talk about building in the right places within existing towns and cities. If we do that, we then actually create more demand for non-car modes of transportation, walking, cycling, public transit, because you have higher densities. So you have to have higher densities of people before you can start saying to people, keep your cars at home. And that's, again, why, I think dealing with the housing issue is so important. If we get that right, a whole bunch of other issues fall into play, and a lot fewer people will need to drive to get from point A to point B.
Can I jump in? So I live in a very rural area, as I think I've conveyed. I imagine almost everybody except people who are living on very tiny incomes has a car here, because it's the only way to get around. We do have some public transit now, but because so many people have cars, it's not really that well used yet. Now, having said that, some people are actually electing to get on the bus instead of drive to the next village. But as far as development, Franz, I agree with everything you said here. We should be building, increasing density in areas that are already inhabited. That's not happening very much, and there's a lot of subdivision development, at least in the planning stage. I'm not seeing much infill. Definitely not seeing, what did you call it, the missing middle? I'd love to see some of that around here, and gentle housing too. So I kind of feel that we've gone back to the 50s. I'll get trolled for that, or whatever you call it. But there you go.
Okay, I've got an interesting question here. So have any of the groups involved developed recommendations for reforming the OLT? It's a hot button issue in Lanark County, southeastern Ontario.
Could you repeat the question?
The question is about, is there anybody coming up with recommendations for reforming the Ontario Land Tribunal? I assume that's what an OLT.
Right.
I'm not sure that any of us have spoken to that, but if anybody is, please speak up.
I think if you asked 100 people on the street, what is the OLT, you'd be lucky if one person knew what it was. Before, I'm sure that there have been lots of smart lawyers and land use planners and urban planners who know exactly how the OLT needs to be changed. The problem is that there is no political will for those changes. The province dramatically changed the OLT in the last couple of years as part of their major changes to land use planning laws. And the only way they're going to, get rid of those mistakes they made is if there's public pressure on them. And so that's why it's really important for everyone to talk to their elected officials. And even if you talk to most elected officials, they won't know what the OLT is or what it does. And that's why, again, you need to keep messaging simple, as Tony suggested. And once the politicians know that there's demand for building in the right places, building the right type of housing, then you're creating space for the experts to come in and say, well, the way that's going to happen is by changing the OLT, taking away the power that is now going to developers and putting it back in the hands of communities and neighbors.
Yeah, and I'll just add one of the things that has changed recently under the Planning Act, as we kind of mentioned in our push, there's a lot to reform the Planning Act, but there was a removal of third-party appeal rights to the Ontario Land Tribunal, which prevents groups like environmental NGOs, community groups from actually having a voice at land tribunal hearings, which is incredibly problematic and not really transparent. So that is a recent change that groups like Ontario Nature and coalitions that's part of has pushed back against significantly. But to Franz's point, given all the various changes that have occurred and the just oxygen that is in the room for a particular issue, I don't know that this one raises to the top. And it is something that concerned citizens just have to keep pushing. And, and you can ask that question point blank to local candidates. And if they don't know what the OLT is, then that's really problematic. That maybe they shouldn't be an elected official in Queen's Park.
Thanks for that answer. We've had a couple questions in the chat. There's actually quite a lot going on in the chat. I'm having trouble keeping up with it as I'm monitoring the Q&A, but some interesting kind of discussion happening, I think, across people. So lots of good ideas in the group. But there's been a couple questions about Ontario Place. So does anybody want to field that?
Sure, I can field them.
Okay, go ahead.
Sorry, was there a specific question, John?
Just kind of what's happening, why is it happening,
Right.
what should we do?
So there's an entity called Ontario Place for All. And if you want to learn about what's going on, and if you feel like many people, including myself, that what's happening in Ontario Place is terrible, visit Ontario Place for All and you can find out. Bottom line, the province has done a number of really questionable things. One, it's signed a 99-year lease with a private sector company that builds spas across the planet. And it's committed to, depends on who you're talking to, anywhere between $500 million to $2 billion in public funds to build an underground parking lot. why we would be doing this. And of course, as a result of this, a very mature urban ecosystem was destroyed. And as a result, a whole bunch of coyotes that were hanging out in Ontario Place are now kind of looking elsewhere, and they moved north and went into a kind of a park area where there were a lot of high-rise towers and a lot of people walking their dogs. And the coyotes, not surprisingly, were hungry and started attacking the dogs. This is a complete waste of taxpayer money, as far as I'm concerned, and it made no sense 3 months ago. It makes even less sense today when the Trump tariff threat means that the provincial government is going to have to invest in a whole bunch of things to help average Ontarians. So it's a prime example, I believe, of a government, caving to special interests, exactly the same way that they cave to very specific interests within the development community, and therefore brought back the suburban sprawl 1950s economic model. So again, if you want to learn more, Google Ontario Place for All, and you can get a lot of details there.
I'll just add for anyone on that, I put in the chat the link. There's another group called Ontario Place Protectors. They are a group that launched an appeal because the original court case brought by Ontario Place for All was dismissed. This group launched an appeal that was heard back in January at Ontario's highest court. There still hasn't been a decision, but it was basically a coalition of the Toronto Field Naturalists, a heritage group, and a democracy group, challenging quite a few of the pretty egregious exemptions that this piece of legislation that enabled the Ontario Place redevelopment, which could have significant repercussions for other cases and other situations in Ontario. We saw with the Bill 212 that was passed in December with the Highway 413 Act, and it enabled a whole bunch of other things, but similar sort of exemptions to the Environmental Assessment Act, which was first kind of tried with this Ontario Place situation. So that the judge in that appeal hasn't made a decision yet, but hopefully there'll be a decision that sometimes governments can go too far, and they shouldn't be allowed to go so far.
Thanks. We have a question about what's happening in Wilmot, where farmland is being expropriated for industrial development. I don't know if any panelists are versed on this issue. Okay, great. I was going to say we could also talk to the loss of farmland generally, but go for it, Franz.
Yeah, it seems like it was 10 years ago, but I think it was less than 10 months ago. The region of Waterloo, it's my hometown is Waterloo, Ontario, so I have a lot of contacts there, and a lot of people who are part of Liveable Ontario live there. Wilmot started coming to a bunch of farmers and saying, you have to sell us your land, otherwise we're going to expropriate it. And they soon found out that they were trying to assemble a large amount of land to build some future, nobody knows exactly what, but possibly big plants building something. Most of the land, if not all of it, was actually being farmed. And when the farming community started saying, no, what's going on here? Why are you doing this land assembly? The region of Waterloo, which was kind of behind this, Wilmot is part of the region of Waterloo, said we can't talk about it. And because we've signed an NDA, I believe. And the province was they said we signed an NDA with the province. And then when provincial ministers were asked, they said, well, talk to Waterloo municipal leaders. So nobody was saying anything. Anyway, that's been going on for quite some time now. There's been huge public opposition in Waterloo region against this, saying this is terrible. We should not be sacrificing precious farmland for building some large, who knows what factory. all of this seems to have come to an abrupt stop in the last 3 months after the election of Donald Trump and the tariff war. It has put a huge chill on international companies coming and building anything in Southern Ontario. So it's unclear what's going on. I don't know the name of the group. I should know this. I'll look for it in a moment, that is behind this, and when I do, I'll put it in the chat.
Thanks. Here's a comment. Fantastic ideas and worth of the use. Sorry, fantastic ideas and a well worth use of time tonight. I wonder, does the livable ideas and gentle density meet our population demands?
Yes. Environmental Defence Canada, one of the member organizations of Alliance for Liveable Ontario and part of the coordinating committee, they released a map, I believe it was summer of last year, which indicated how much land there already is set aside in existing urban boundaries and existing towns and cities to build. And they, if I recall correctly, noted that if we built in these spaces, like this is land that's already there, if we built in these spaces at the density levels we have in Little Italy, for those of you from outside of Toronto, Little Italy is kind of in the downtown core. It's not very, very highly, it's not extremely dense, but they're fairly small properties compared to suburban areas. But anyway, if you built the Little Italy density, you could get at least 4 million homes built in the Greater Golden Horseshoe, or I think it was actually the GTA. We commissioned a report back in 2023 by Kevin Eby, a well-known planner, former planner from the region of Waterloo. He looked at land that was set aside by municipalities in the Greater Golden Horseshoe by 2021. And based on very, very conservative assumptions, they said there was more than enough land set aside to build 2 million plus homes. And the Premier has been talking about building 1.5 million homes over the next 10 years. So in 2021, there was enough land for over 2 million homes. And this was at fairly low density levels. So short answer is there is more than enough land already set aside to build all the housing we need, probably for the next 20, if not 30 years.
Thank you. This one's about conservation authorities. So given the desire to bring back their power, is there any concern that some of the stronger environmental voices of those conservation authorities have left, and many who remain are sort of beholden to the government's sprawl agenda? How do we kind of get back to a place where the conservation authorities are doing their job, the right people are there, and they're empowered? Sorry, Tony, I think you're muted there. Yeah.
Sorry. It's a good question, yes, because the conservation authorities have faced repeated kind of changes to their mandates, and yes, a lot of people have left, but I think in the conservation movement within Ontario, there's lots of committed and passionate and dedicated people. So if we restore to the conservation authorities to what they are originally envisioned to be, I think you won't have an issue ensuring that the right people are still in the places that they need to be. And I think it's important to remember why the conservation authorities were established in the first place. It was a result of Hurricane Hazel in the 50s, which basically saw mass flooding and destruction in the Toronto area. And as we know, with climate change, we're only going to see more and more intense and frequent storms. And, Toronto's had 300-year storms in the last few years, things that are only supposed to happen every 100 years. So it's more important than ever that the conservation authorities exist, and they are something that's unique to Ontario and that's something to be proud of. And they do fantastic work. So I think it's, vital that more and more Ontarians know what they are for and why they're important.
Great. Okay, this one's about nuclear energy. So why are we considering new nuclear energy ahead of demand management, renewable energy, hydro? Are those solutions not more economical?
Ontario Clean Air Alliance, and maybe I could ask Tony to find the link for that and pop it into the chat, has been working on this for probably a couple of decades. The short answer is because the nuclear lobby and the union representing the nuclear workers are extremely powerful and have continued to have an impact on both politicians at Queen's Park as well as civil servants there. And the sad reality, I remember talking about these issues 25 years ago, and the perceived wisdom amongst environmentalists was, well, we just have to prove that solar power and renewable power is cheaper. And once that happens, and once they see the benefits of how much cheaper it is, politicians will stop supporting nuclear power. Well, renewables have been cheaper than nuclear power for at least probably 5, if not 10 years. Yet there's still huge amount of support from the province for nuclear power. And that's because of the power of the lobbyists. And just to bring my presentation back to a key element in it, it's all about deploying power. And if enough of us said, this is stupid, we will not agree with this, then change happens. Of course, getting people to talk about nuclear power right now would be almost impossible, perhaps even more difficult than talking about the environment. But it shows how important power is in politics. And if we want to stop bad things from happening, the only power we have is to organize our communities the way that Gerry has, the way that Ontario Nature does through their nature networks. We got to get people engaged. We've got to get our neighbors and friends engaged, and we can stop bad things from happening, which is what we did with the Greenbelt land grab.
Yeah, I don't have anything to add to what Franz said, but I think too it's important to remember that also not just nuclear. We've seen recently in Ontario a trend for more and more gas-fired power plants, which is taking the province in the wrong direction. Ontario was on the path to have a largely emissions-free electricity grid, aside from obviously the other issues with nuclear in terms of waste. But we're kind of trending in the opposite direction and investing in gas-fired power plants at a time when renewables are the cheapest form of electricity. So it's quite confusing. Economically, it doesn't even make sense.
Got a question again. I'm really testing your breadth of knowledge here, and so far you guys are passing with flying colors. But there's a geopark proposed in Georgian Bay. Are you familiar with it? Do you know if it's been approved? Not sure. Okay, finally got stumped, the three of you. Here's a question that, so is Ontario prepared to deal with the catastrophic fires like the recent wildfires in California?
That's a good question. I would say one of the issues you see with wildfires in Ontario is they don't tend to threaten major populated areas. They threaten Indigenous communities that tend to be remote, but they don't necessarily threaten major populated areas. Could that change? It's entirely possible, yes. And I believe, again, is something Ontario's wildfire preparedness at the ministry has been underfunded for quite some time now. So, but Ontario is a jurisdiction that, thankfully is fairly humid and gets a lot of moisture. So compared to Western Canada, we do not have the wildfire issues. That's not to say that they don't happen. So if they were to threaten a community like Thunder Bay or Sudbury, I think it could be as devastating.
Thanks, Tony. It's now 8:25, so I'm gonna pass it back to Lesley.
Thanks, John, for moderating that, and thank you, Franz, Tony, and Gerry for fielding those questions. Just going to wrap up. I think maybe if I can, Tony mentioned that you have 30-second soundbite. So from each of you, can I get your 30-second soundbite of what people should do this election to help protect the environment? I'll start with Tony since it was your your idea.
Vote and take as many people with you as to vote. I saw a comment that young people traditionally don't vote. Well, get them out, take them with you, and just vote.
Thanks, Tony. Gerry.
Yes, talk to your community. Certainly get out and vote. If you can attend an all candidates meeting, there are a few out there, despite the very little time that people had to organize them, and find out what people have to say and push your questions about what you think is important.
Thank you. And Franz.
Listen to your friends and family. Find out what are top of mind issues to them. And chances are quite high, those top of mind issues have an environmental perspective to them, and then draw the connection. Well, if you're worried about affordability in housing, well, we got to make sure that we're building in the right places and the right type of housing, etc. And that will have a positive impact on the environment. If we get enough people to do the right things that aren't not necessarily because they care about the environment, but because it helps meet a need they have, we can do something really positive for the environment and vote and get engaged.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Thank you to all three of you for sharing all your thoughts and ideas. As I said, this webinar is recorded. You can watch it again. You can share it. There's been lots of links shared in the chat from these organizations and others that people are sharing. That's awesome. I appreciate that. Tony just shared a link. There is another webinar on Wednesday from the Greenbelt Alliance. So that's something else. Thursday, the Greenbelt Alliance. So you might want to check that out, especially if you're in the sort of Greenbelt area. We're also offering, if people would like, are interested, you can send me by email your tips and tricks for influencing decision makers in this election, and I will send out that list of tips and tricks when we send out the webinar recording in a few days. So if you send me those, let's say by end of day tomorrow, I will share those with everybody. And with that, thank you very much to Climate Legacy for co-hosting this with us. And thank you for John and Betty and Jackie and the speakers, and to all of you for joining us. And yeah, we get out there and vote and get engaged, and hopefully we can make a difference.